Welcome to Malifaux University. 920, Bayou Starter Box. If you're a player new to Malifaux, you may have received a great deal of information and advice about which faction is best for beginners, which master or keyword wins the most tournaments, and more. This information is largely opinionated and will change rapidly over time, so at Malifaux University, we still recommend you look at the basic lore of the game and factions available on the Wyrd website and follow the rule of cool. That is, whatever looks cool, feels cool, or makes you say, "Oh, cool," is the faction you should play, because you'll enjoy it the most, and that's ultimately the point of the game. Each faction has a starter box with 4 models. The soulstone cost of the individual models will vary, but the entire crew will add up to 25 soulstones, which is perfect for a small game. The starter box also contains a unique faction-themed fate deck, 10 scheme markers with the faction's logo, a measuring widget, and all the general upgrades available to your faction. Let's talk about each of these before we get to the models. This fate deck, while themed for the faction, is not the same as the regular faction fate deck you can purchase separately in the Wyrd store. This one is unique to the starter box, which is pretty cool. These are paper cards, which means they're not necessarily the most durable, and if they get wet, they will take damage. If you'd like to make them last, you can buy standard-size card sleeves from your friendly local game store in a variety of colors and styles. Just keep in mind that once you sleeve your cards, you won't shuffle them like a regular deck of cards. You'll blend the halves of the deck from the side 5 to 7 times. If you shuffle them normally, you'll put creases in the sides of the sleeves and kinda wreck them. A cardstock sheet has 10 scheme markers and the measuring widget. Punch them out carefully so you don't tear the design. These scheme markers do not need to go onto plastic bases. They're already 30 millimeters across and ready for the table. You can use these with any crew in this faction you later decide to build. If you play against someone else with a crew in the same faction, you'll need to distinguish your scheme markers from his somehow, maybe by putting a coin on top of yours. The measuring widget is a fantastic tool that can stand in place of a measuring tape in most situations. It has 1, 2, 3, and 6-inch sides. If you place the tool between 2 models, it makes it easy to tell if they're within 1 or 2 inches for engagement. If you need to measure an odd number like 5 inches, just lay down the 3-inch side of the widget, then rock it around the 2-inch corner like so. You'll also notice it has a 50 millimeter cutout. This is a surrogate blast marker. If you're unfamiliar, some game effects have this symbol, and when it appears, a model might suffer blast damage. You determine that by placing a 50 millimeter base over the area, usually in base contact with the original target model, and any models within the 50 millimeter blast area are affected. You can use this widget to measure that 50 millimeter diameter without having to place a 50 millimeter base on the table. Watch video 209 for detailed instructions on how to handle blast markers and damage. In the plastic sleeve with all the model stat cards are the general upgrades allowable by your faction. You can add these to your models before the game when you're hiring your crew with certain restrictions. Each upgrade adds abilities, actions, or both, so you might want to hold off on using them when you're first starting out. Once you get the hang of your models as they are, then switch things up with an upgrade or 2. Later, when you're building other crews led by master models, you can still use these upgrades with other models in the same faction. Check out video 406 for detailed instructions on how to use upgrades. The models in the starter box are all pre-assembled. This means they are all molded at the factory and are each a single piece, so no assembly or other tools are required. The only thing you'll need to do is glue them onto their included bases. Check the base size on the bottom of the back of each stat card to make sure you put each model on the right base. You could use regular white glue, also called PVA glue, but you'll find it doesn't hold very well for long. Most players will use plastic glue to fuse the models to the bases, but this works only if it's plastic to plastic. If you create thematic bases out of cardstock, cork, wallpaper, or anything else, you'll probably have to use superglue. You see the models here already painted and ready for the table. Somewhere along the way of preparing this video, I lost the work in progress photos I took, but if they ever turn up, I'll redo the video. None of these models is balanced enough to stand on their own. Stumpy has large enough feet that gluing her to her base shouldn't be a problem. Ruffles has only 1 foot down, but it's a pretty big foot and should hold him well. Fluffernutter and Bo Peep are problematic. Fluffernutter has 2 tiny forefeet with the toes of his left hind foot on the ground. Given that his body is a solid ball of plastic, I went ahead and put a pin through his left forefoot, gluing it, the other forefoot, and the left hind foot to the base. Bo Peep has just the 2 forefeet of her boar on the ground, and one of them is a peg leg, making it even tinier. You can try to put a pin through one of those feet, but I went the easier route and balanced her with basing. I took 2 bits of talus, which is a fancy terrain word for loose rock, and glued them in a stack behind Bo Peep. I then rested the belly of her boar on those stacked rocks, gluing it in place along with the 2 forefeet to make it look like she's leaping over the rocks. Grab a stick you can make look like a log, a rock from outside, or anything else you think looks all right. Clean it up, glue it down, and you'll be ready to play. Once you have the models on their bases, you could put them on the table and get right to playing. When you can, though, you'll want to paint them according to your own unique style and preference. You might feel like you're not very good at painting models, but it's a skill that takes practice, and there are no better models to start on than your starter box models. There are countless YouTube channels, live streams, and other resources available to teach you how to paint, so we won't repeat that information here. I must admit, I found all 4 of these models challenging to paint. Their designer clearly loved the work, and each model is rife with details that escaped my attention at first glance. As you paint them, you'll discover rings, clothing, ropes, toes, and all sorts of little features that you'll have to choose to paint or ignore. Each model is a unique character, and there is no rushing through these. Here's one way to paint your models, and here's another from our friend Brendan Muse, and another from Dagan Lenti at Handbasket Games. You can see more of his handiwork at the link in the notes below. I'll take a brief moment now to thank all those who were patrons at the time this video was made, especially Griff, Suttergay, Tom, Alan, Jeremy, Mikolai, Oleg, and Travis, and many more at the free student tier. Your support is essential to bringing these videos to life. Now that we've explored everything else in the box, let's get to the models. The Jockey Keyword models were introduced in the Malifaux Burns rulebook, so refer to that book for the lore and stories that go along with this crew. 4 more came out with the Ashes of Malifaux rulebook, so you can expect to see more of these racers on the table the more you play. All of the models have the Jockey Keyword, so as long as range, line of sight, and other rules are satisfied, any ability or action that refers to a friendly jockey model can be applied to any of them. Like all starter box models, they are all versatile within their faction and can be hired into any Bayou crew without a hiring penalty. If their cards are updated through the errata, you can always get the most current cards through the Malifaux Crew Builder app or from the resources page on the Wyrd website. You'll notice that each model also has another keyword linking them to other crews in the Bayou faction. Bo Peep has Suey, which is used by Ulix Turner. Fluffernutter has Whizbang, used by Wong. Ruffles has Trixie, used by Ma Tuckett, and Stumpy has Swamp Fiend, used by Zoraida. Though they are not the subject of this video, Ashes of Malifaux jockey models include Drumstick, which has the Big Hat keyword, used by Summerteeth Jones. Barrelby, with Try Chi, used by the Brewmaster. Toast, with Captain Zip's infamous keyword. And Squish and Squash, with the Kin keyword, used by Ophelia LaCroix. Models in the Bayou Starter Box all have the Ramming Speed, Stampede, and Trample abilities in common, with each model having one other ability that aligns with its other keyword. The Ashes of Malifaux jockey models reverse this trend. They all 4 have the Stampede ability, and then 3 other abilities each to help them integrate with their other keyword crews. With that said, let's focus on our starter box. Bo Peep is the henchman who leads this crew. As a henchman, she is the only one of the jockeys eligible to use soul stones. One of the primary dynamics of the Jockey Keyword models is movement. They were all inspired by the Bayou Bash board game produced by Wyrd, which is a crazy Mario Kart-style game and a ton of fun to play. You should pick up a copy from the link in the notes below. Ramming speed gives jockey models a boost to their charge actions. Remember that charge lets your model push up to its movement in any direction and then take an optional melee attack action. Ramming speed increases the duel total of that attack by 1 and adds any one suit to your duel so you can get a specific trigger from that attack. We'll look more at this later. Stampede, which is the ability common to even the Ashes of Malifaux jockey models, comes into effect after completing a charge action. The charge is not complete until you make the push and then opt to make the melee attack or not. You don't have to make that attack, but once you decide either way, you can choose to take 1 damage with the Stampede ability. If you do, all other models in base contact with your jockey then suffer 1 damage. This may seem like a bad deal, but just wait. Trample, the third common jockey ability, lets your models move through other models. It doesn't matter if they're walking, charging, pushing, or if another model is controlling and moving your model. When it's moving, it can pretend the other model isn't there and just go. You still cannot leave an enemy model's engagement with the walk action, though you can walk through them to maybe get to the other side of them, and you still cannot overlap the bases of models when you're done moving. Bo Peep's fourth ability is, "And the crowd goes wild!" This says Bo Peep, or any other member of her crew, that ends its activation within 8 inches of Bo Peep, heals 1 for every other model it damaged during its activation, to a maximum of healing 2 points of damage. So remember when the Stampede ability said she'd suffer 1 damage to inflict 1 damage on every other model in base contact with her? Well, Trample can let her move through other models, giving her a chance to get into some tight spaces with other models. Stampede can then damage those models, and this ability lets her or the other members of her crew who finish their activations within 8 inches of her heal 1 or 2 to recover from the Stampede. Kinda cool. Bo Peep's only attack action gives her a 2-inch engagement range. Since she's on a 40mm base, this means she can control more than 5 inches of the playing area. Normally, Barbed Whip does 2 or 3 points of damage. If the target is at half its maximum health or lower, then she gets a positive modifier to the duel. When it comes time for the damage flip, take note that weak and moderate are both 2, so if you can't get it up to severe, there's little point in cheating on the damage flip. Remember that the ramming speed ability adds 1 to her duel total if this attack is part of the charge action. Whether she flips it, cheats it, uses a soul stone, or picks the suit from ramming speed, Barbed Whip has 2 triggers. A mask gives Hogwash Slosh, which places the target model anywhere within 2 inches of Bo Peep. It does not say completely within 2 inches, so as long as any part of the other model's base is within 2 inches of Bo Peep, it's totally cool. A Crow gives the Rampage trigger that pushes Bo Peep through the target model for a total of 5 inches. It doesn't say up to 5 inches, so you must go the entire distance if at all possible, and in a straight line because it's a push. Both this trigger and the Trample ability say to ignore other models when moving, but at the end of the 5-inch push, every model she pushed through must pass a target number 13 movement duel or else suffer 1 damage. This can be a handy way of maxing out the "and the crowd goes wild" ability, and ensuring that Bo Peep gets to heal 2 at the end of her activation. Bo Peep has 2 tactical actions, one of which is her bonus action. The Race is On has a stat of 5 and a target number of 12, which means she needs to flip or cheat in at least a 7 to make it happen at all. The italicized text also says she can use this only once during a model's activation, so if she uses it during her own activation, it's like a bonus action. If Bo Peep is controlled with an Obey-type action like Zoraida has, she can still do this action only once during Zoraida's activation, even if Zoraida gets the ensorcel trigger on her Obey, which basically lets her control two actions from the same model. Very simply, this action lets Bo Peep and all other friendly models within 3 inches of her push up to 3 inches in any direction. Remember that she can move through other models with her Stampede ability. Because it says may push, any models that are right where you want them can stay put. Also, it says up to 3 inches, which means you don't have to move any of them the full distance. You'll notice that the stat comes with a built-in crow and that both of the triggers for this action come from the crow, so you can declare either of them when you successfully use this action, regardless of the suit of the card you use. Full contact increases the distance of the push for Jockey Keyword models only by 2 inches. If those Jockey models move through another model during that push, the models they move through suffer 1 damage. Note that it doesn't say any enemy models. So if you push the Jockey models through other friendly models, those friendly models will suffer the damage. Another reason you might not want to use the full distance of the push. Keep in mind that if Bo Peep moves through another model and injures it, that would count for her "and the crowd goes wild" ability and would let her heal at least 1 at the end of her activation. The other trigger is Pork Roast Rodeo. This applies to any models that got pushed with this action that have the Beast characteristic. In the starter box, that's Bo Peep, Fluffernutter, and Ruffles, but does not include Stumpy. This trigger says that if those Beast models wind up in base contact with a scheme marker, they must remove it and heal 1. It doesn't matter if the scheme marker is friendly or enemy, and if you push 2 Beast models into contact with the same scheme marker, you can choose which one removes it and is healed. As always, declaring a trigger is usually optional, so even with the built-in crow, you don't have to declare and use either of these triggers if you don't want to. Bo Peep's bonus action is Reckless. With this, she suffers 1 damage and gains the Fast condition, which gives her 1 additional action during her activation or cancels out the effects of the Slow condition. Even with this additional action, she still cannot break the rule about using the Race is On more than once during her activation. Fluffernutter is the next model in the starter box. Like Bo Peep, he has Ramming Speed, Stampede, and Trample among his abilities, but he also has Evasive, which he gets from the Whiz Bang keyword models. This ability lets him reduce all damage suffered from shockwave attacks, pulses, and blasts to 0. His Tear Apart attack gives him a 1-inch engagement range, has a stat 5, and simply does 2, 3, or 5 points of damage. If he gets a mask in the duel, he can declare the Pulled from a Hat trigger, which lets him flip over his discard pile and shuffle it. While it's still face down, he draws the top card into his control hand, and then you flip it back over and it becomes your discard pile again. Kind of a cool way of adding a card to your hand. The other trigger comes from a crow and is called Rampage, which is identical to the Rampage trigger on Bo Peep's Barbed Whip attack. Remember that if Fluffernutter winds up within 8 inches of Bo Peep by the end of his activation, he'll heal 1 for every model he damaged during his activation, courtesy of her "and the crowd goes wild" ability. Fluffernutter's second attack action is a projectile attack called Broken Down Rifle with a 14-inch range and a stat 5. This is also a simple attack that does 1, 3, or 5 points of damage. The only trigger is Magic Act and comes from a mask in the duel. This lets you pick any type of marker within 2 inches of the model you targeted with Broken Down Rifle, pick it up, and put it back down anywhere within 2 inches of that same model. Any models within an inch of the marker once it's back on the table suffer 1 damage with no chance to save against it. Just remember that you cannot move strategy markers this way, but scheme markers are fair game. His only tactical action is Carrot Cake Quake, his bonus action. This can happen automatically and doesn't require a flip. If you use it, Fluffernutter takes 1 damage, but then all models within 3 inches of him also take 1 damage. Again, be mindful that this action does not distinguish between enemy or friendly models, so you might wind up hurting members of your crew if you use this near them. If they wind up within 8 inches of Bo Peep, though, you might not care. Ruffles has ramming speed, stampede, and trample, and his fourth ability comes from his Tricksy keyword and his scamper. This ability lets him push 2 inches in any direction after an enemy model within 6 inches completes an action or ability in which he cheated fate. For example, if Klaus Norwood from the Neverborn Starter Box used his Sharp Wit attack on Ruffles and cheated fate to win the duel, Ruffles would gain the slow condition from the attack and then get to push up to 2 inches in any direction if he wanted to. If Klaus cheated fate during the attack and still wound up losing, Ruffles would still be allowed to push 2 inches since this ability says the enemy model just needs to cheat fate. It doesn't have to win the duel. Also take note that Ruffles doesn't have to be involved in the duel where the enemy model cheats fate. If Klaus Norwood is within 6 inches of Ruffles when he attacks Bo Peep with Sharp Wit and cheats during the duel, Ruffles can still push 2 inches after the attack is resolved. Ruffles' beak attack gives him a 0-inch engagement range, so he must be in base contact with his target to use it. It does 2, 4, or 5 points of damage and has 2 triggers. A mask in the duel lets him declare pecking order, but only if he targeted an enemy model with the beak attack. If that's the case, his crew gains a pass token. The crow gives him a rampage trigger, which works exactly like the rampage trigger for Bo Peep and Fluffernutter. Ruffles has a stolen starter gun projectile attack with a 10-inch range. This does 1, 3, or 4 points of damage, and then pushes the targeted model up to 2 inches in any direction. The only trigger is called False Start and comes from a mask in the duel. This trigger can be declared only if Ruffles shot a model with the Beast characteristic or Jockey Keyword. That implies you might want to shoot a member of your own crew to get them to push 2 inches, because this trigger doubles the push to 4 inches. Any models you push the target through then suffer 1 damage. When you attack friendly models, remember they can relent to your attack. You flip for the attack, but don't flip for the defending model, and the defender is assumed to have the same score as the attacker. But this works only for when you attack friendly models. Models cannot relent to enemy attacks. When the defender's duel total matches the attacker's, it puts a double negative modifier on the damage flip, so you'll flip 3 cards and take the worst of them. This usually guarantees you do weak damage and not hurt your own models too badly. Ruffles' only tactical action is his bonus action, Crazed Chicken. This does not require a flip and can simply happen if desired. Ruffles suffers 1 damage, and then other models within 3 inches of Ruffles are pushed up to 2 inches in any direction. Since this is a pulse, it does not apply to Ruffles himself, because pulses do not affect their sources. Since it says up to 2 inches, any models that are right where you want them can be left alone. Stumpy is the 4th and final jockey model in the starter box, and the only one without the Beast characteristic. Stumpy still has ramming speed, stampede, and trample, but also has planted roots. This ability has 3 parts to it. First, Stumpy cannot be moved by enemy effects. If there's an attack that would push or place Stumpy, she simply ignores the movement part of the attack. Next, planted roots let Stumpy ignore severe terrain while moving. Severe terrain normally requires twice as much movement to cross as regular terrain, but Stumpy can treat it like regular terrain all the time. Lastly, if Stumpy is in or touching severe terrain when she activates, she heals 1. Her axe melee attack gives Stumpy a 1-inch engagement range and comes with a stat 5, doing 2, 4, or 5 points of damage. Like her jockey teammates, it has the rampage trigger from a crow. If she gets a mask in the duel, she can declare the Timber trigger, but only if the targeted model is within an inch of blocking terrain or severe terrain. That could be something as simple as a little crate, an entire building, a copse of trees, or an underbrush marker with the severe trait. If this is the case, the targeted model gains the slow condition. Toss in the Mud has a 2-inch range, but is neither a melee attack nor a projectile attack. It has a stat 5, but also has a target number of 12, so she must flip or cheat in a 7 or better to make it work. If she succeeds in the action, she pushes the targeted model up to 2 inches in any direction, and then ends any one condition that model has. If you use this on a friendly model, you might end the burning, poison, or slow condition. On an enemy model, this could end their focused or fast condition, or any other condition you think gives them an advantage. If she gets the stuck in the swamp trigger from a mask, the targeted model gains the staggered condition. The cool part is that if the targeted model is in any type of terrain, a forest, a water feature, or even touching a building, any enemy models also in or touching the same piece of terrain also gain staggered. This means that beyond the initial target of the attack, you can pick and choose which models gain staggered in case you want to avoid giving the condition to any of them. Stumpy's only tactical action is also her bonus action, Spread Roots. This does not require a flip and can just happen if she wants. This action produces a 3-inch aura around Stumpy until the end phase that enemy models have to treat as severe terrain, requiring twice as much movement to get through. It costs her 1 damage to do this, but with her 40mm base, this makes a field of severe terrain more than 7 inches in diameter, which is pretty cool. Just keep in mind you cannot use this ability during Stumpy's activation and have it still count in the next turn for her Planted Roots ability, since it will have disappeared during the end phase. If you use this bonus action before using the axe melee attack, the aura would meet the demands of the timber trigger if the targeted model isn't already in blocking or severe terrain. Now that you understand how your models work together, practice playing a simplified game. This format also works very well in your friendly local game store for demo games. Set the table with a normal amount of terrain, as described in the core rulebook and also in video 301. Each player claims 1 standard deployment zone, which is an even strip across one side of the playing area 8 inches from the table edge. It doesn't matter who goes first or sets their models on the table first, as long as no part of any model's base extends beyond the deployment zone. Watch all the videos in the 100 and 200 series so you have a grasp of the fundamentals before you play. Be sure to have corpse and scrap markers, as your models will likely drop one or the other of these when they are killed. Some models also use them for special effects. Lastly, you'll need pass tokens to either skip activating a model as the balance of the game shifts, or to pay for other special game effects depending on your crew. With that said, you'll play a full game of 5 turns, but with only 4 models in each crew, it won't take that long. You can play at just 25 soulstones, which will be all the models in your starter box, or you can play at 30 soulstones, which gives you a few extra for an upgrade or 2 and some soulstones left over for your soulstone pool. You might want to wait until your second or third game before adding in upgrades and soulstones, and for your first game, just focus on the abilities, actions, and basic game mechanics. You also may have learned that in games of a certain size, the crew leader gets to take 3 actions and a bonus action. That size is 50 soulstones, so at this 25 or 30 soulstone level, all models, even the crew leader, will take just 2 actions and a bonus action. Like regular games, there is no scoring victory points in turn 1. In turns 2 through 5, each player can score victory points in 2 ways: kill an enemy model, or place a scheme marker into base contact with a piece of terrain that is on the enemy half of the table. You'll have to remove the scheme marker to score the point, but in this simplified game, you can score as many victory points as you're eligible each turn. If you kill 1 enemy model anywhere on the table, and then remove 2 scheme markers that you had placed next to terrain on the enemy side of the table, then you'd score 3 victory points that turn. At the end of the 5th turn, count up all your victory points and see who won. Be sure to show good sportsmanship and shake hands with your opponent after your game. After a few beginning games like this, look into the Henchman Hardcore format in Gaining Grounds and take your game to the next level. That's the overview of the Bayou Starter Box. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargames Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content. And be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.